Good afternoon, it's Debbie Evans and Rolo here, and today we're delving into the first book in the Secret Adventures of Rolo series, and this one's called Athelstan and the Time Tunnel. And today we're having an adventure in France in 1783. This involves a hot air balloon, so settle down, Rolo, time to read. Another big adventure, said Yulia by way of greeting, and off we went down the time tunnel. Hard to find at the base of the tree as it was covered with spring's new growth. I hope it's not another one like Pompeii, I thought to myself. Little did I know this was going to be even more of an adventure. I couldn't wait to exit the time tunnel and hardly took any notice of where the entrance was. I certainly had a spring in my step. Where on earth was I this time? It is September 1783 and I'm in the grounds of the Royal Palace at Versailles on the outskirts of Paris. A large crowd has assembled, but they're not looking at me. There is what looks like a large laundry basket standing in the middle of the courtyard, and this is the focus of their attention. Being a very curious Jack Russell, I can't help but peer in. Bizarrely, there is a duck, a sheep and a rooster huddled in the corner of a wicker basket, and all are clearly terrified. I can smell their fear. The murmur from the crowd rises in pitch to an audible buzz of anticipation. What on earth are you all doing? I asked the rooster, who seemed to be quaking marginally less than his strange companions. I believe we're about to alley-oop in the air, pour le roi et la reine, spluttered the rooster, not at all surprised that I could communicate with him. I didn't really know what he meant, but I felt it was impolite to say so. He spoke with a French accent similar to that of Degree, the greyhound from my first adventure. Don't say no, roosters can't fly, he went on. I'm here entirely for that reason. They want to see what will happen to me at altitude. Apparently, the king wanted to use human prisoners for this experiment, but the inventors overruled the king. Can you imagine? The duck piped up in a high-pitched voice, probably due to nerves. I can fly, of course, but using my wings, not in this unnatural contraption. The sheep just bleated, rolling its eyes and looking rather sick. Don't mind her, said the rooster. She's here because she's called Montgolfier, which you English would translate as climb to the sky. That's a laugh. Just look at her. I thought he was being rather unkind and tactfully changed the subject. The poor sheep was obviously cacking itself. What exactly are you standing in? I asked, my nosiness finally getting the better of me. I peered into the large oblong basket. Why don't you hop in and regardez for yourself? There's space for another passenger if we all squash up a bit, the rooster invited. The more the merrier. Without further ado, I jumped in the basket, causing the duck to flap its wings and the sheep to bleat even more pathetically. Clear the decks, said the rooster importantly, stamping round and making room. The roar of the crowd reached a crescendo, and all gave a collective sigh and broke into applause. Suddenly the ground seemed to give way beneath us. The floor didn't seem too steady at all. There was an almighty whooshing sensation and a lot of swaying from side to side. The occupants of the basket bumped into each other as we tried to steady ourselves. Zut alors, shrieked the rooster. The duck quacked and the sheep just went on bleating. We seemed to be gaining height and I was feeling very wobbly on my little legs. Finally, my legs stopped shaking, and I put my paws on the side of the basket and peered over the rim. I wanted to see what was going on below. Whoops, I shouldn't have done that. We lurched a little to the left with a shift of weight. Quickly jumping back down on the floor of the basket, I reported my sightings to the others. Well, we seem to be airborne, I exclaimed, and all four of us looked up to the heavens. Above us was a rather large and colourful inflated bag. There was a roar of flames which seemed to encourage the bag to rise even higher, dragging the basket with us, and we hung for a while precariously hovering over the assembled French court. I peered over the rim again and spied two very important personages wearing tall and elaborate wigs and very fine clothes, seated on thrones on a raised platform. These were presumably the French royalty, Louis XVI and his Queen Marie Antoinette, in the days before they became unpopular with the masses who wanted their heads. I felt the urge to wave back, but instead made an important observation, pointing out to my terrified companions that the basket was actually tethered to the ground by a rope, and that as we had taken up all the slack, we wouldn't be able to rise any higher, unless of course the rope breaks, I added mischievously. At this point the duck looked a little green and the sheep was sick. The rooster pretended it was just a daily event to be taken in his stride. After less than 9 minutes of floating to a height of around 1,500 feet, we were gently pulled down to the ground by people manning the rope, and the crowd cheered. The fire under the balloon canopy was extinguished, the basket tipped over as we touched down, and we all tumbled out in a heap of tangled wings and legs. As it happened, none of us the worse for our airborne adventure. Someone asked who Le Chien was. I presumed that was me and wanted to give my name. Surely we'd taken part in a historic event, the very first manned, or should that be animaled, balloon flight. I pointed this out to the others, but they didn't seem very impressed. As it was only the 18th century, no one took our photos nor interviewed us for a live television news broadcast. Ah well, time to find the tunnel again. Amazing that I could not only travel back in time, but to other countries as well. What adventures I can have! But wait, where was the time tunnel entrance? I couldn't remember where it was. I didn't have a clue how to locate it, didn't recognise anything in the palace grounds, and the crowd were milling about, flocking towards the exits now the spectacle was over. I got caught up in the thick of it and carried along without any idea if I was heading in the right direction. I started to worry about the time. If I couldn't get back through the time tunnel, I wouldn't be back in my basket in the kitchen when the smiley lady came to let me out for my early morning constitutional. No time to panic. Think clearly, Rolo. I decided to hide underneath the stage where the royalty had sat and wait for the crowd to disperse. This seemed the best course of action. I hadn't taken much notice of my surroundings when I popped out in France and really could not remember where the time tunnel was. Darkness descended and a breeze caught a strange shape which started billowing on the ground in front of me. Of course, the discarded balloon. It was still lying there tethered and quite forgotten once the excitement was over. Presumably the Montgolfier Brothers would be back in the morning to retrieve it and analyse the success of their flight. If only I could fly the thing, I would try to find my way across the channel and back home to Wiltshire before I was missed by my people, who would surely be distraught if I was to go missing. I sniffed around the balloon and realised it was quite hopeless. I couldn't light the fire to make the balloon gain height, let alone steer it to England. I settled down to sleep in the basket. Dreaming of my own basket and not being given to despair easily, I felt sure I would think myself out of this predicament in the morning. I didn't have to wait that long. An hour or so later, I heard voices, human voices, and two ponytailed men approached, bearing flaming torches. They were inspecting the balloon and talking in excited whispers. I coughed politely and then jumped out of the basket at their startled feet. "Excuse me, are you the owners of this balloon?" I inquired politely to the men with ponytails. "Jacques, did you hear that petit chien speak, or am I imagining things?" "Non, I believe I heard le petit chien speak. Are we both going crazy, Joseph? Is it the excitement of the success of our balloon making us hear things, do you think?" I pressed on. "Excusez-moi. Sorry to startle you, but my name is Rolo and I'm in a bit of a fix. Can you fly this balloon?" The Montgolfier Brothers stood opening and closing their mouths like goldfish. "Actually, I'm in a bit of a rush. S'il vous plaît, allez, vite, merci beaucoup." I threw in the only French words I knew. My limited vocabulary comes from listening to the floppy-haired boy's French home tutor. Stunned, the boys had a quick discussion, and I heard a lot of muttering and saw a lot of hand-waving. It seemed they had a bit of a dilemma, as the king had confiscated the balloon and they had come back to retrieve their property under the secrecy of darkness. Lucky that they had. I know I'm an intelligent dog, but I don't think I could fly it on my own, let alone navigate the way back to the southwest of England. They turned to me, finally in agreement, and gestured to me to hop into the basket once more. Without wasting any more time, Joseph cut the tethering rope with his pocket knife, jumped in the basket with me, using one of their flaming torches to light the burner. Jacques paid out the shortened rope until we began to drift, and then he too jumped in. There was something wrong with the burner, however. Jacques jumped out again and pulled on the rope, resulting in a rather bumpy landing. The brothers' eyes were as round as saucers, and their adrenaline was pumping at the thought of such an illicit adventure, and both feared the king's wrath when he discovered the balloon he was pretending to have invented had disappeared. I could hear their combined heartbeats thumping so loudly in unison it might appear that the balloon was to be powered by a motor. As the brothers worked on the burner apparatus, I explained my predicament. I needed to go to the southwest of England, toot sweet, and I'd be very much obliged if they could assist me. Much to my surprise, both Joseph and Jacques spoke excellent English. Thankfully, still under the cover of darkness, the brothers worked silently and quickly to reassemble the balloon and the repaired burner to enable us to escape. Up in the air again we went, and this time the brothers were satisfied with the action of the burner. Silently and high over the palace walls we flew, and stealthily along the rooftops of villages and towns, until finally we were above treetops and at last over the sea. Just as well it was still night time, as anyone on the ground looking up might have thought they were seeing a gigantic, scary bubble monster hovering in the sky above them. The Montgolfier brothers smiled and nodded, and to pass the time of flight once we'd gained altitude, explained to me that their father owned a paper mill and that they'd been messing around trying to float little bags in the air made of paper and fabric by way of scientific experiment. The inquisitive brothers had discovered that when they held a candle near the opening of the bag at the bottom, the bag would fill with hot air and rise upwards. They tried to build a larger version out of silk lined with paper, and the demonstration of this had gone very well indeed, with the ballon reaching a height of over 6,000 feet with no one inside it. Word of their achievement quickly spread to Paris, and they were summoned to the French court. Today was only their second attempt at balloon flight, and they had secured a light basket and gathered some animals for the journey. They were delighted with how the demonstration had gone, but both were keen to actually ride in the balloon themselves. They thought that the balloon could be modified to carry a number of passengers over great distances. This idea greatly excited them. The trouble was, the king was so impressed by the ballon that he had claimed the invention for himself, and the crown had seized the design and forbade the brothers to take home the original model. The brothers thought this very unfair, and so had sneaked back to Versailles in the night to retrieve their beloved creation. Now it seemed their only chance to put their invention to the human passenger test was to rescue this crazy little English dog and try to fly across the sea with him. I was delighted to have made such good and useful friends. I'd really landed on my paws this time. I looked over the rim of the basket, listening to the roar of the flame, which kept us aloft, and the gentle accents of the brothers who were piloting the craft, and I couldn't help wondering how they were going to get back to France, having dropped me home, and successfully keep their names on the invention. It all seemed rather unfair to me that the king could take all the glory for himself, for an invention that wasn't even his in the first place, but it sounded rather familiar if you remember King John and the Charter. It was very cold at high altitude, but I daren't complain. I was just really grateful to be heading home. Joseph took off his thick jacket as he was working up quite a sweat as he wrestled with controlling the power of the flame, and, anticipating my needs, he lay it on the floor of the basket. I snuggled into it. At last, lulled by the welcome sound of the sea as we crossed the channel, I slept. When I awoke, it was already morning, and I stretched, feeling for the confines of the wicker basket, similar to my own. For a moment I'd forgotten where I was, and then realised I was actually standing on my feet at the bottom of my garden. How on earth did that happen? I didn't think I'd even told the Montgolfier Brothers where I lived. No time to ponder that now, no time to lose. I had to get back through the trapdoor quickly. And I just snuggled myself into my basket when the smiley lady opened the kitchen door with her usual cheery greeting and tummy rub. What was very unusual, however, was that the floppy-haired boy appeared behind her shoulder, his hair tousled, and he was rubbing the sleep from his eyes. The smiley lady greeted him, ruffling his hair and saying, "Hello, love, you're up early this morning. What's the matter with you? Can't you sleep?" And he replied, "Mum, come quick. There's a hot air balloon hovering right over our garden." So that's the end of today's chapter. I hope you enjoyed that particular chapter as we progress with National Storytelling Week. And Rolo and I will be back tomorrow afternoon at 3:30 with another adventure for you. So thank you very much for listening and enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.